Now in this lecture, let's try to write the minimal OpenAPI specification document so that we can get started with the journey of OpenAPI specification. I know you are super excited about starting with the OpenAPI specification structure, how to write it using YAML format. So in this lecture, we are going to focus on writing the minimal structure or the minimal elements that we need to write inside a OpenAPI specification in order to make it as a valid OpenAPI specification document. But of course, OpenAPI specification or OAS structure is a very long and complex one, and that's why we are going to divide it into multiple lectures and we'll focus element by element. And during the same journey, we're going to discuss what is the purpose of particular configuration or particular element so that we are taking baby steps towards the goal of learning OpenAPI specification. So if you ask me like what are the basic elements that I need to write inside my OpenAPI specification to make it a valid, these are the minimal elements that you need to write. Like you can see on the left hand side, I have put a small image where I have mentioned the minimum set of elements that we need to write. Like one is the OpenAPI, and inside that you need to mention the OpenAPI version as a value. And post that OpenAPI root element, you will have an info object. Inside the info object, title and version are the mandatory fields. So that's why, though there are many other elements that you can write inside info, but on a high level, if you want to get started with the minimum structure, at least you have to define the title and version inside the info object. And at last, the other mandatory element, just like OpenAPI and info, is paths element. So under the paths, we can define the array of paths, like what are the paths that are supported by your APIs. But for a minimal structure, you can keep these paths as an empty array, which indicates as of now you don't have any API paths supported by your backend code. So that's a minimal structure. On the right hand side, I have also given a brief introduction. What is the purpose of each of these elements? Like OpenAPI is the very first root element that you need to mention, and this is a mandatory element. You can't skip that. So if you want to write anytime a OpenAPI specification document, this is the first element that you need to write. And against this OpenAPI key, you need to mention what is a value. So inside this value, you need to mention the version of the OpenAPI that you are using. So as of now, like 3.1.0 is one of the version of the OpenAPI. So you can define that. And the next mandatory root element is info. So info is an object. So using this info object, we can define the information like introduction about your APIs. What is the purpose of your APIs? What is the business that you do? What are the functionalities that are supported by your APIs? So all those kind of information we can write with the help of info object. And inside that info object, two sub elements are mandatory. The very first one is title. Title is something like quick summary that you want to provide for your APIs. Like if someone want to understand what is the purpose of your APIs, you can mention that description inside the title. And the next is version. So under the version, you can mention the version of your APIs. This version is different from the OpenAPI version that you have mentioned in the very first element. Like you might get started for your APIs with the version 0.0.1. Like whenever you release major releases or minor releases, you can keep increasing this version number accordingly. So this version indicates the versioning mechanism that you want to maintain for your APIs or for your application code. And at last, the last mandatory root element is paths. Like I was telling before, using these paths, we can mention the list of or array of path objects, like what is a path supported by your APIs, whether it is an HTTP GET, POST, and what is a request structure, what is a response structure. We can define all those detail under this paths root element as an array of path objects. But in order to get started with a minimal OpenAPI document, you don't need to mention any path related information. You can simply make this paths as an empty array. So I hope you are clear about the minimal OpenAPI document that we can get started. So in order to write the OpenAPI specification, of course, I can write in a Notepad or Notepad++ or any text editor. But the disadvantage that we have with this text editor is they don't give you an inline feedback. Like if you are missing any syntax of OpenAPI specification and YAML, you will not get any inline feedback or warning, which is again not a good approach to get started with the OpenAPI specification. So that's why we have a Swagger tool with the name Swagger Editor, which is developed by the Swagger team itself. So using the Swagger Editor tool, we can write the OpenAPI specifications very easily, and at the same time we can get the immediate feedback as and when we are writing and updating our OpenAPI specification. So let's try to write this minimal OpenAPI document quickly inside that Swagger Editor. So in order to write our first OpenAPI specification document, we need Swagger Editor. For the same, I came to the swagger.io website. So here under these tools, under open sources, there is a tool with the name Swagger Editor. So please click on that. So here you have multiple options for all the Swagger tools. You can download those tools and you can set up in your own environment, or you can deploy and try them in the cloud, or you can also use a browser version of it. Since we are learning the OpenAPI specification, the browser version is good enough, but if you are working on a very big enterprise organization where they don't want to use a browser version because that will expose your sensitive data or API's information data. So in those kind of scenarios, you can simply set up this tool inside your own network where there are enough firewalls using which you can control that your information is not going outside your company firewall network. So here for now, we can get started with this live demo option. So as soon as I click on this live demo, you can see I am navigated to a new website called editor.swagger.io. So here you can see as of now, there is already an OpenAPI specification example provided by the Swagger team. So this is an example OpenAPI specification of an fiction application with the name Swagger Pet Store. So like you can see on the left hand side, this is all the OpenAPI specification. So don't get worried by looking at this complexity of this structure. It's very super easy. We are going to learn everything by end of this course. And on the right hand side, you can see the representation of the same in an UI format, which means your Swagger Editor tool has both editor and UI tool as well. So there is a Swagger UI tool which is embedded inside the Swagger Editor tool, and the same you can see on the right hand side of the web page. So now here you can see I already have an OpenAPI specification for the example application which is Pet Store. Obviously we don't want to follow that. We will build something on our own. During the same journey we will learn everything about OpenAPI specification. So before I try to delete all this content that we have, let me explain you one very important thing about the very first root element. So here you can see this example is built based upon the Swagger 2.0 version. So that's why the root element is Swagger. But like I said previously, in 2015, Swagger is acquired by the Smart Bear company, and they have donated the specifications to the open source community, and they have renamed that specification from Swagger to OpenAPI specification. So that's why there is a 3.0 version came into picture, and from 3.0 we need to call that as OpenAPI specification. So from 3.0 you should not use a Swagger, instead you should use the OpenAPI. So that's a major difference that I want to highlight here. Now let me clean all this. So the very first element that we need to write here is OpenAPI, and what is the version of your OpenAPI. So I can write the current version of OpenAPI, which is 3.1.0, but unfortunately as of now these tools which are developed by Swagger team and Smart Bear team, they have not upgraded their tools to support this latest version. So instead what we can do is we can use the version which is 3.0.3. So there is not much difference between 3.1.0 and 3.0.3, but by the time you are looking at this course, my recommendation is you try with the 3.1.0. So if the Swagger tools are supporting 3.1.0, I would say go ahead with 3.1.0. Otherwise, you can simply move to the 3.0.3 version so that there won't be any issues using these Swagger tools. And of course, whenever an OpenAPI specification new release is introduced, Swagger team, they will take some time to upgrade all their tools because they have to do a lot of testing, R&D. So once they feel very comfortable, then only they will release to the market. So the same happened with 3.1.0. So as of now, they are not supported. Let's use the 3.0.3. So here, as of now, you can see, so as soon as I provided this information, it is complaining two important mandatory fields are missing. The very first one is info and the second one is paths. So let's quickly provide the info object. Again, you can see here we are following the YAML structure. So very first line, you can see this is the key and this is the value. And inside the info, since it is an object, I need to give an enter and provided a tab. After this, under info, we have two mandatory fields which we need to provide. The very first one is title. Under title, we can mention a value saying that Easy Shop Products API definition. So this is the title that I want to provide because we are going to build an OpenAPI specification for a fiction application with the name Easy Shop. So that's why I have given this title. The next mandatory element is version. You can also see here version is missing. So that's why we need to make sure we are also giving the version. So the version is the key and the value that I want to give is 0.0.1. And post that, it is complaining that paths is the missing element at the root structure. So I need to navigate back to the root element structure. So here I need to give the paths as a key. And since it is an array, for now I just wanted to keep it as empty. So inside YAML, an empty array can be represented with the help of empty curly braces. So I'll just mention a opening brace and a closing brace. So with this, you can see all my compilation issues are resolved on the UI side also. And it is a basic OpenAPI specification that I have written with the help of this OpenAPI info and paths. And you can also see my Swagger UI is telling there are no operations defined in the specification. It's just a empty specification without any API paths information. So I hope you are clear like how to write a minimal OpenAPI specification document. I will upload all these OpenAPI specification documents that we are going to write in the GitHub location. Please refer the GitHub location whenever you have some doubt, whenever you have some issues. So instead of I uploading a single large file, what I will do is I will upload this OpenAPI specification document at regular milestones. So this is the very first milestone that we have achieved. So I will upload this into the GitHub as well. So with this, I'm super happy because we had the taste of success very first time inside this course. Bingo and kudos to all your efforts. Thank you and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.